Coming up on District Wire News, will the U.S. government shut down? If the President and Congress don't reach a decision about the 2011 federal budget by Friday, the government may close. We'll explain how this all affects you straight ahead. We've got a live report and an in-depth interview with an expert.
Then, a measles outbreak in D.C. People riding the Metrobus may be the first to have been exposed to the disease after an infected woman used public transportation. District Wire News starts now. Good evening, I'm Heather Fung.
And I'm Danny Rizzo. As we speak, Congress is debating what to cut and what to keep in the 2011 budget. With the threat of a government shutdown looming, Dan Merica joins us live in the studio with the latest on the budget standoff. Dan?
Thanks, Danny. In the last year, Congress has not passed one federal agency budget. The stalemate is leading to a possible government shutdown as soon as the end of this week. While Republicans and Democrats try to reach an agreement, the country waits to see if Congress can keep the government open for business. Politicians in Washington have their eye on Friday, the date Democrats and Republicans must reach an agreement on the 2011 budget. But if they can't agree, funding will dry up and the federal government could shut down. House Republicans, led by Speaker John Boehner of Ohio, have proposed a 2-week budget continuation that would cut $4 billion from the current spending levels.
We have a moral responsibility to address the problems that we face. And that means working together to cut spending and to rein in government.
Congress disagrees on whether it should continue to pass short-term budgets, instead of debating the entire budget as a whole. If Congress passes another continuing resolution, it will be the 5th in this fiscal year. But most Democrats say Congress isn't looking at the entire budget.
Focusing on just a small part of the budget. Only 12% of the budget is being considered for reduction. And if we're going to ultimately solve this problem, we're going to have to do much more than consider only 12% of the budget.
This would not be the first time the government is shut down. In 1995, then President Bill Clinton and Speaker Newt Gingrich couldn't agree on cuts to Medicaid, and the government shut down twice, in 1995 and in 1996. The GOP got most of the blame for the 95 shutdown, and James Thurber, professor at American University, believes the current House GOP has learned from their mistakes.
Republicans really have a clear strategy, theme, and message. They are all teed up to blame the president for this. That was not the case in 95 and 96.
Each government agency has their own guidelines for shutdown. So a shutdown this week would be different than one 16 years ago. What is expected to shut down? 368 national parks and museums, passport offices, bankruptcy filings, and all non-essential government employees would be asked to go home. No matter what closes, experts say the political stakes are high for both parties. For District Wire News, I'm Dan Merica. I'm here with Mr. Curtis Gans. Mr. Gans, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure. So I'm going to ask you the question that's on everybody's mind. What are the chances we have a government shutdown after Friday?
It is unlikely that we'll have a government shutdown on Friday. It is probably unlikely that we'll have a government shutdown anytime in the next year and a half. On the other hand, we may be having a series of continuing resolutions all the way up to the 2012 election.
That's, the interesting thing is how this plays with the American public. And that's what so much depends on the election. Washington Post poll came out and 36% of people polled blame Republicans, while 35% blame President Obama and the Democrats. Basically a wash. Your expertise is in polling. What did you think of the poll? And let me know, what do you think of how this plays with the American population?
I think the poll is too early because the issues have not been highlighted. There's a basic issue underlying, which is to say, is unemployment more important or deficit reduction more important in the immediate? The Republicans are essentially arguing for deficit reduction and an ideological agenda of how you achieve that reduction. The Democrats are going to hold the line against the ideological agenda and excessive present deficit reduction that might hurt the jobs issue.
So this is not the first time our government has been on the brink of shutdown. In 1995, as was said in the package, President Clinton and Newt Gingrich stared down and could not agree on cuts to Medicaid and Medicare. A poll back then said that 46% of Americans after the shutdown blamed Newt Gingrich and the Republicans for that shutdown. What do you see are similarities between now and 1995?
I think the similarities are very strong, because it wasn't only, by the way, Medicare and Medicaid, it was also environmental policy and a whole series of other things that, that the Gingrich Congress was pursuing. And I think that's happening now. There is a desire, at least on the part of Speaker Boehner, not to have a shutdown. So that it is likely that we probably will have continuing resolutions of some duration with small things being done. For instance, today there was a GAO report that showed massive duplication of programs within the federal government. I think you're going to get agreement between the Democrats and Republicans to consolidate those programs and by virtue of that reduce spending. I think that one will pass it to be the next continuing resolution. But I don't think you're going to have any agreement on $61 billion worth of reduction and getting rid of Head Start.
So $61 billion, you're referencing Eric Cantor proposed cutting $61 billion from the 2011 federal budget, something the Democrats won't agree to. Let's go back to John Boehner, though. John Boehner was there when Newt Gingrich stared down President Clinton and saw the repercussions of that. He has 87 new House members, many of which made promises to their constituents to make some cuts to the federal government. How does John Boehner rein in those 87 new members while also realizing the history of this issue?
I don't envy John Boehner's herding of the cats, which is what essentially he has. John Boehner, I think, at least realizes that there was not a mandate for $61 billion worth of cuts and cuts on major programs that the majority of Americans support. Whether he can persuade his group in the House that they have to moderate what they're proposing will be one of the adventures we'll have for the next year.
Well, we will all certainly be watching. Mr. Gantz, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Heather, back to you.
Thanks, Dan. In Libya, protests and the government's violent crackdown continues, and Western governments are responding. The U.S. has frozen $30 billion in Libyan assets, and European governments are making similar moves. The U.S. and NATO are also moving military forces into the region. Meanwhile, leaders are calling on Libya's Muammar Gaddafi to step down. He is denying there are protests in Tripoli, Libya's capital, where pro-democracy protesters have gathered and clashed with government forces for days as the death toll continues to rise. CNN's Relitza Vasilva has more.
Protesters in the town of Zawiya chant for the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi. 14 days into the uprising, anti-government forces edge closer to Gaddafi's stronghold of Tripoli. But here, just an hour west of the capital, government forces have defected to the opposition. South of Benghazi in eastern Libya, a Libyan Air Force jet bombed a military base believed to be under the control of anti-Gaddafi forces. And in Geneva, diplomats are trying to figure out how to help remove Gaddafi from power. The U.S. Secretary of State says the international community needs to put more pressure on the regime.
Through their actions, they have lost the legitimacy to govern. And the people of Libya have made themselves clear. It is time for Gaddafi to go.
Over the weekend, the UN Security Council voted for tough restrictions and an investigation that could lead to war crimes charges. But with thousands fleeing into neighboring Tunisia, leaders say it will take more than diplomacy to solve the crisis.
It's not just about these sanctions, it's about getting support into the country, it's about being ready to deal with the problems that are being created by people leaving the country, and of course making sure our citizens are safe.
Relitza Vasilova reporting.
Egypt's head prosecutor is barring former President Hosni Mubarak and his family from leaving Egypt. Attorney General Abdel Mahmoud is also seizing Mubarak's finances while the new government investigates corruption charges. Mubarak is accused of taking millions of dollars from official funds.
Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker has issued an ultimatum to the 14 state Senate Democrats who have fled the state. The Democrats are attempting to block a bill that would restrict public workers' collective bargaining rights. But Walker says if they don't return, the state would lose its chance to refinance $165 million of bonds.
The Maryland House Judiciary Committee is voting on a same-sex marriage bill today. If the bill passes, people at the American University say this means new options for a new generation. Yesenia Alfaro has the details.
Some might oppose for same-sex marriage and others might agree. The decision will be made today and will reach final vote if the bill receives a majority of numbers. At American University, students respond to this bill.
I think it's time. I think this is a real civil rights issue, of this era, and I think, at least for my generation and below, it's something that people, they kind of assume it's going to happen.
And as the new generation thinks differently, Bianca Rainwater, graduate student at American University, says religion should not matter for same-sex marriage.
If it's supposed to be separation of church and state, then I think as long as they go through the regular, process of, getting a marriage license and paying necessary fees or whatever, I don't think it should matter if it's 2 men, 2 women, or a man and a woman, because they're not in your house. They're not forcing you to be married to them. They're not forcing you to have their same lifestyle choices. So I don't think it should matter.
Matt Bruno, program coordinator of the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender, has been with his partner for 10 years, and he says if the bill passes, he will be moving to Maryland.
The more options there are for same-sex couples to get married in not only the district but in Maryland, I wouldn't be surprised if people from Virginia moved. So it might have a direct impact on me, yeah.
If the bill is approved, Maryland will become the 6th state to legalize gay marriage. For District Wire News, I'm Yesenia Alfaro.
President Obama announced yesterday that he's willing to let states opt out of the most controversial parts of his healthcare law, including the one that requires most people to have health insurance. The president told governors at a White House meeting that he would support bipartisan legislation that lets states waive federal requirements in 2014, 3 years earlier than the original law did. He says states will be able to waive the requirements only if they can find another way to provide affordable coverage without adding to the national debt.
D.C. schools will likely have fewer teachers and larger class sizes this school year, thanks to the city's budget crisis. Proposed budget cuts are supposed to be announced this week and will force district schools to lay off teachers and staff in large numbers. The district spends more than $1 billion a year on its public and charter schools and is more than $500 million in debt. This comes less than a week after Prince George's County released a new school budget that cut hundreds of teachers' jobs.
Virginia healthcare centers that perform abortions will be regulated more strictly starting this summer. Abortion rights activists say this is a political decision which might force clinics out of business. Victoria Rinkicevitue has the story.
Healthcare centers in Virginia performing abortions could now be regulated as hospitals rather than doctors' offices if a new bill before Congress passes. The bill would apply to clinics who perform at least 5 first trimester abortions a month starting this summer. Anti-abortion activist Rebecca Herr spoke to American University students about how to get anti-abortion ideas into the legislation. She says the new rules in Virginia come just in time.
It has just come on the heels of these recent release of videos from the group Live Action that shows Planned Parenthoods across the country, including Virginia, being willing to aid and abet sex trafficking of underage girls.
This healthcare center in Falls Church provides service for 3,000 to 6,000 patients a year. Rosemary Coding, a director of patient service, says if the new rules apply, the center might need to install a shower and get a backup generator. She estimates it would cost around $100,000.
May have to evaluate whether we can provide abortion care if indeed there are onerous regulations.
Abortion rights advocates say the new rules place a constitutional burden on women's ability to get an abortion in Virginia. Law experts say the worry is real as the rules target access to abortions. However, there's no right in Constitution for a woman to get an abortion.
The specific holding in Roe decriminalizes abortion, but it does not provide a constitutionally protected right to abortion.
Director of Patient Services in Falls Church calls the new regulations a political decision because it is targeted only to clinics that perform abortions. Delaware and Georgia are considering the similar legislations also. For District Wire News, I'm Victoria Rinkicevitue.
A woman is dead today after she crashed into the truck in the 3rd Street tunnel. Police say a crew from the Department of Public Works was working on the left side of the street when the woman hit the back of their truck. The accident happened after midnight and shut down the southbound lane earlier this morning. Police say 3 city workers are in the hospital with injuries.
The City Department of Health is warning D.C. residents about a possible exposure to measles. A woman infected with measles traveled to Dulles Airport and came through the district and Maryland. She got on the D bus line in Georgetown and went to Columbia Heights. People at the Potbelly Sandwich Shop on Irving Street may also be exposed. The health department says people exposed should make sure they have 2 doses of the measles vaccine.
If you take the Metro daily, you may want to hide your cell phones and MP3 players. The new Metro security report says crime on the Metro has hit a 5-year high, and thieves are targeting electronic equipment. Brutal attacks and sexual assaults have also increased. Metro says they plan to improve security in its Metro stations, but are reminding customers they too are responsible for their safety.
That's why we ask our customers to always pay attention at all times to their surroundings, always look up, look around. If they are listening to or looking at their iPad or their iPhone or listening to music, use a different type of color earbud, like a black earbud, as opposed to a white one that stands out.
Also posting reminders for riders, urging them to stay alert, and plans to create an online video showing how fast the robbery can actually happen.
Police are investigating an attack on a man that left him with bruises and in need of stitches. A mob of teenagers attacked 41-year-old Robert Joy Friday at the Suitland Metro Station on the Green Line. Joy is now missing 2 front teeth, has 8 stitches on his mouth and a black eye. He says he doesn't feel safe on the Metro or the bus after the attack.
Continental Flight 1559 was forced to make an emergency landing Monday morning after hitting a bird on takeoff from Reagan National. Some people saw flames coming from the plane's engine as it diverted to Dulles International Airport. The Houston-bound flight landed safely with no reported injuries.
Coming up after the break, diversity at American University. New data shows some groups are underrepresented on campus. There are many international students, but we'll tell you which minority group the university is hoping to attract.
And new Metro Police Department policy calls for quieter late night from college students. But the policy could end up costing students big money and jail time. We'll have the details after the break.